honor for me to actually be speaking on tonight to kick off the Sanctity of Life series. Obviously, as you all are probably aware, we're coming up on an anniversary in the history of our nation that for us as Catholics and pro-life advocates, for those of us who are here that are that, we mourn, not commemorate and celebrate and get excited about the 40-year anniversary of Roe v. Wade. And so this month, it's just an honor to be a part of St. Tim's Sanctity of Life series and to kick it off tonight with such a, casual topic like does contraception prevent abortion or cause it? A brief introduction about who I am and how I came to be standing up before you and talking about something so controversial in our society today. I am a Catholic convert, actually. I've been Catholic for almost 11 and a half years, almost 12 years this summer, actually, which is just so bizarre for me to even wrap my mind around because it's gone really fast. And before I converted to the church, I actually held a lot of the secular beliefs that we encounter in society today. I was very pro-choice. Didn't really know why. It just sort of seemed like it was the more tolerant position to hold. And couldn't really defend any of my arguments, but I never actually had a reason to. Never had, anyone that I really had to have the argument with. I just sort of used all the bumper sticker debates and the slogans and the catchphrases, and you kind of just throw them out there like grenades and leave them and run. And it's so widely supported and hailed in our culture that there's just really, I never had any interest or reason to even pursue the pro-life side and hear what the pro-life argument happened to be. And when it came to contraception, I mean, that wasn't even on my radar. That's, of course, just responsible behavior for any adult. And so I figured that when I was, married at some point, that would just be a part of my existence and hadn't even questioned it, really. So these were two issues that I actually really, really wrestled with quite a bit before coming into the church. I am now extremely passionate on the other side. It's God's way of having a huge sense of humor in my life, saying, these are two areas you're struggling with. I'll get you on board. I'll actually have you start speaking on it at some point. And part of my conversion process occurred when I met the love of my life. I'm married to one of the greatest men. I won't say the greatest, because I know every wife in here is thinking, I have the greatest man. But I'm married to one of the greatest men in the world, and when we met, he actually had just applied for seminary. So it's a classic love story, really, right? The agnostic feminist meets the devout guy who's going to become a seminarian and maybe be a priest. But so I had promised him that I would look into the Catholic Church, into the RCIA process, and that I would discern the possibility of becoming Catholic. I didn't commit to that. I didn't say I would, but I said I'd be open to hearing what the church had to say about a lot of these issues. And I was kind of surprised that I had a lot of holes in my own thinking, and it was a very humbling experience. He did go to seminary. He did come back. I didn't go and claim him back. He came back on his own. And we have now been married for actually 10 years. A week ago, we'll be celebrating our 10-year anniversary, so I'm very excited about that. And we have 3 beautiful children, a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old boy, a 2-year-old little girl. And yes, I am pregnant. It's not a prop for tonight's conversation here, due April 5th, and we don't know what we're having, so we're looking forward to that. And it's just such an honor to be here tonight and to be able to share some of the information that I have been blessed to come across and be enlightened by. It's certainly nothing that is new. It's out there. This information out there. I just have an opportunity to sort of present it to you this evening. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Oh, and one little disclaimer too. Of course, we can never have technology without having problems with technology. So this was perfectly aligned on my home computer, and then I switched to another computer and brought it here. And so there are some quotes that they'll be dangling off the screen every now and again. I apologize for that. And some things that look like they may not be spelled correctly, like there's an E missing and it's on the bottom. So I didn't do that on purpose. It looked right on my computer, so I apologize in advance and hope that you can bear with me on that one. So, to start this evening's talk, does contraception prevent abortion or cause it? Well, as we know, this is often just sort of a throwaway question for our secular culture. This is something that the culture itself says, well, of course, obviously, if we have more contraception, we're going to be able to prevent abortion. So we're going to dig into that a little bit and talk about whether or not that's really the case. And we're going to start with some of the things that society does say specifically starting with contraception. What does the culture say? What are some of the prevailing opinions that we encounter regarding contraception? First of all, of course, it says it prevents an unwanted pregnancy. And of course, on the surface, this seems to make perfect sense. A couple doesn't want to have a baby. We have this great medical technology that's in place that can, that a woman can take. Generally, it's usually on the woman, and we can prevent these unwanted pregnancies. And you know, the wisdom would suggest then if we have fewer unwanted pregnancies, we would have fewer abortions, right? Because a lot of the people who are going in and actively choosing to abort is because they have an unwanted pregnancy on their hands. So if we can get more contraception out there, we can lower the abortion rate. On the surface, trying to make sense. Contraception has also been pitched, especially in the very beginning stages, as something that would help relationships. And the reason why is it was sort of thought of as, you know, this stress or this burden of pregnancy that's sort of weighing on couples. They could kind of relieve themselves of that and really just enjoy their relationship, enjoy their sexual relationship in particular, and be free from this fear that there might be a pregnancy that results. And this, of course, kind of then evolves into the idea that maybe you can sort of test drive your future spouse a little bit sexually without the worry of a pregnancy or a child that ultimately ties you to that person for the rest of your life. So we have contraception now that can really allow people to really hone in and find that perfect person for them and then get married and not have to worry about an unwanted baby coming into the picture. I'm guilty of this, of having believed that contraception is the ultimate liberator of women, right? This is how it's been pitched since it first came on the scene, specifically in 1960, that this is what will free women, you know, from the shackles of their fertility. You know, they're bound to the home, they're bound to kids, they can't get out there and conquer the world like men and sit in cubicles all day and attend business meetings, and you know, they have this horrible thing, this problem that they have where they can get pregnant, and now they can be free of that. And this has really been resurrected, as I'm sure you're aware, in the last year with the whole HHS mandate sort of being at the forefront of the presidential campaigns and our current insurance changes that are happening. And so this has really been touted as sort of a women's issue and something that empowers women. And we're going to get into that a little bit because on the surface it may sound great, but it's actually quite the opposite, or at least I'm hoping that I'll be able to articulate that it's quite the opposite. One of the other sort of offbeat arguments for the use of contraception specifically is this overpopulation issue. Oh, we're so overpopulated. We just hit 7 billion, or about to hit 7 billion people, and this is just like mass nightmare. What are we going to do? At some point, we're going to outnumber our resources. We're not going to have enough resources on the planet to support the number of people. And so contraception, of course, is now this great tool that we can use to make sure that, you know, we can control how many folks are living on this planet and not have too many that are over-using up all the food and all the resources that we have available. So these are popular arguments. They're not the only ones, but they're certainly some of the big ones that you often hear out there in society. And they're going to do well for us, at least, to kick off this talk and get into some of the misconceptions and some of the connections specifically to abortion. So what is the truth? Are these prevailing opinions that are constantly promoted everywhere you go, is that a proper assessment of things, or is there perhaps another story? That's what we want to address tonight. This may be the popular opinion, but it's not the only opinion. And we know, for starters, that our Catholic Church highly disagrees and has disagreed for 2,000 years. And of course, the Church itself, you know, is, especially nowadays, it is really under attack, or at least its stance on these issues is under attack. And we want to step back and question why that is. What does the Church have to say about these issues that really fly in the face of what society thinks it can get out of these issues? The Church says that abortion and contraception are intrinsic evils. Intrinsic evils. What does that mean? Well, it means it's always gravely wrong. It's always, there is never an exception or a condition in which any one of these would ever be acceptable in the life of the human person. And that's a pretty hardcore stance, especially in our society today. And I think it's because we often operate under this idea of exceptions and conditions, like, well, you know, maybe I wouldn't use abortion as birth control, or I certainly don't believe in gender selection abortions, but I mean, come on, if a woman is raped, I mean, obviously then it should be okay, right? We put these exceptions on the rule. And even with contraception, which is certainly much less adhered to, even in our own Catholic Church, among our Catholic faithful, we often hear things like, well, I kind of get what the Church is saying. I kind of get where they stand on this, but, I mean, well, obviously the mother's health is really at risk, and getting pregnant would be a problem for her and could risk her life. Well, then sure, it's okay to use contraception, right? And the Church says, no, wrong. And it states it very firmly in our catechism. In the catechism, the Church says this about abortion. Since the 1st century, the Church has affirmed the moral evil of every procured abortion. This teaching is not changed and remains unchangeable. Direct abortion, that is to say abortion willed either as an end or as a means, is gravely contrary to the moral law. Now this is what it has to say about contraception. Very similar in its condemnation. Every action, which whether in anticipation of the conjugal act or in its accomplishment or in the development of its natural consequences, proposes whether as an end or as a means to render procreation impossible, is intrinsically evil. It comes from the Catechism, but it cites the 1968 encyclical Humanae Vitae, which was written by Pope Paul VI. If you've never had a chance to read it, it's a very short document. I highly, highly recommend it. It's actually one of the documents for me that was a real turning force in my acceptance and embrace of the Church's stance on this. It's so prophetic and it's so articulated in a way that you really, you see the Holy Spirit's hand through it all. And so I highly recommend you getting a hold of it. You can just check it out online. So ultimately, in holding that these two things in our world are both intrinsically evil, the Church contends that they're sort of siblings, if you will, that really kicked off and has ushered the sexual revolution into the 21st century. That they really walk hand in hand, and that in many ways contraception has led to and continues to lead to abortion. So now we want to address sort of whether or not that's the only opinion out there, or if the Church stands alone on this, or if there's perhaps been any other thoughts out there before where perhaps other people condemned contraception or had the same kind of thoughts. And that's actually the surprising fact, and for me it was a very surprising fact, because I was sort of one of those people that held, you know, the Catholic Church is just this crazy cult, it's stuck in the Dark Ages, you know, this guy with a pointy hat, he just makes all these arbitrary decisions and all these rules for people to follow, and it just seems ridiculous, altogether just ridiculous. So, I want to talk a little bit about the fact that the Church was actually not always the only one that held these opinions. Opposition to contraception was actually a universal opinion among all Christian denominations. And even Calvin and Luther were strongly opposed to contraception, had actually spoken out against it. Teddy Roosevelt, in fact, President of the United States around the turn of the century, he said this about contraception: "It is the one sin for which the penalty is national death, race death, a sin for which there is no atonement." And I would add that the prophetic words of Teddy Roosevelt are playing out right now, especially in Europe. There are many countries in Europe right now, France, Germany, Spain, Italy, that are literally contracepting themselves out of existence. And they are being bombarded by a strong Muslim immigration, and they don't have the same low fertility rate. So these countries that are not meeting their own replacement rate are literally dying out. And so now the government's sort of seeing this as a demographic issue. They're seeing it as an economic crisis. They're trying to offer these incentives for these couples in their country to make babies. They're basically saying, we'll give you tax breaks, we'll give you child care help, we'll give you transportation help. The maternity leave that the women get in France is just incredible. It's like minimum 4 months fully paid. And it's all with the hope that they can encourage their countrymen to actually start reproducing more because they're so below the fertility rate. So Teddy Roosevelt was onto something with that. And this kind of goes back to that overpopulation claim, right? And that if we're overpopulating, then how is it that some countries are actually not replacing? They're not giving birth to the same number of people or more that are dying off. And that's because overpopulation really is a myth. And if you've never checked out a website called overpopulationisamyth.com, it's a great one, especially if you have 20-something-year-old kids or you yourself are 20-something. There's very short little videos that kind of talk about the logic behind why overpopulation doesn't really work out. So that's just kind of an aside. But one of the things that the stats that I've heard is that we are slowing down in terms of our population rate. And in the next 25 years or so, we're going to reach our peak, and then by the end of the century, we're going to start declining, where we're going to be back to 7 billion again. And at the rate that we're moving, with contraception and abortion being so much a part of this culture, we're going to continue declining. So overpopulation is really not an issue we have to worry about. But, okay, those are all asides. So contraception, universally condemned by all Christian denominations until 1930. And in 1930, the Anglican Church held a Lambeth Conference and made the determination that contraception in rare cases could be acceptable under grave circumstances for married couples only. Those were the terms, that's what they stated, and this kicked off a domino effect that now leads us to where we are today, where the Catholic Church virtually stands alone. All other Christian denominations have followed suit. So how does that then connect us to abortion? Okay, contraception is one thing, right? But how does that get us into abortion? Well, we're going to try to connect those. I want to talk about a couple of different ramifications of how contraception and abortion are linked. The first we're going to go over is legal ramifications. We're also going to talk about some of the social, psychological understanding of sex and sexuality and marriage that will hopefully help bridge some of those gaps between contraception and abortion that we may not readily see on the surface. And then we're going to conclude with talking about how contraception works in particular and how there's much more of a closer link to abortion than you might think. So let's start with the legal connections for starters. Let's go back into the mid-1800s. We have what we call Comstock laws that were on the books. And these laws, basically, they were put in place by Protestant lawmakers. And they were basically laws that prohibited obscene material from being sent through the United States Postal Service. And obscene, under the umbrella of obscene, was information on contraception, information on abortion, and actual contraceptive devices. And these laws were very strictly adhered to during that time, and the lawmakers who put them in place were actually very proud of how well they were working. Nowadays, of course, it's talked about as censorship and perhaps too much government control, but at the time, this was in line with what the traditional moral values of the culture were. Side note, too, sort of along this time, as we were entering into the 20th century, at the beginning of the 20th century, the United States, which is unknown to a lot of people, was actually one of the first countries to institute compulsory sterilization programs, which you may know is sort of a first step in a eugenics program, and eugenics being basically trying to weed out undesirables in a certain demographic, certain groups of people. And some of the groups that were targeted were mentally disabled in some of our state mental hospitals. There were some minorities, Native Americans, I understand, and then it was also used as punitive for criminals that were in prison. And this was sort of kind of hush-hush, but it wasn't really contested much. And then along the same lines, we had Margaret Sanger, who popped in at the early part of the century, and she started to push bringing contraception into the foreground for women specifically, so that they're not stuck, popping out all these babies, and felt that this was a right for women to have. So this is all going on under the fact that we have legal laws that are against contraception, that are considered obscene. Contraception is considered against the moral law, natural law, and so our country was sort of in this interesting pivot point, really. Now, everything changed in 1965, and really we can say it changed before that because the mentality of the culture was changing long before that. But in 1965, a landmark case called Griswold versus Connecticut was handed down. And basically what this was is it was a Supreme Court case that was challenging the Connecticut law, the Connecticut state law, that said that they could not sell or distribute birth control or any kind of contraception in the state for any reason. And the Supreme Court, the key thing to know about what happened here was that the Supreme Court, this is the first time that they invoked the right to privacy that we hear so much about right now. You probably know if you have any kind of constitutional understanding that there's really no right to privacy written directly into our Constitution. It was inferred from the penumbras of the Constitution, namely the 9th Amendment and the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. So this was sort of the first time where the Supreme Court federally mandated that a state could not infringe on this individual liberty of right to privacy in the interest of the state itself. And so that was kind of a big landmark thing that happened in 1965, 5 years after the birth control pill actually came out of the market. Now, before 1973, I want to go back to, in 1972, there was a follow-up case, Eisenstadt versus Baird, and it extended the Griswold decision, which was only to married couples. It extended it to unmarried couples as well, and that was within less than a decade. The thing about that is, obviously, this is well into the sexual revolution. This was sort of a technicality at that point because people were having access to contraception. It didn't really matter if there were laws on the books or not because they weren't really adhered to, but the Supreme Court decision to then extend it to unmarried couples suggests that you can see that loosening, the legal loosening of any kind of laws that upheld what was the traditional moral stance for many years prior, and specifically in our country. Now, 1973, of course, Roe v. Wade is handed down. And here's what's important to understand about this particular case and its connection to contraception. In this case, in the Griswold case, we had the right to privacy. In Roe v. Wade, they used the precedent of Griswold versus Connecticut's right to privacy when they invoked that new right that sort of was pulled out of the Constitution. That was used as the basis for deciding Roe v. Wade. And so they went directly back to a case that was specifically about contraception, and that is how we got abortion to be something that was now had to be available in every single state. So right there you have this very clear legal thread that connects contraception to abortion, and it's called the right to privacy. Now, what did Roe v. Wade actually decide? Because this is even contested. I mean, I cannot believe how many conversations I've had with people, and they will disagree with me on what Roe v. Wade actually is, what it says, what it does, what it's all about. So let's get some background on that because it can be helpful in discussion. First of all, it didn't technically legalize abortion, it just basically took it out of the state's hands. The states already had power to prohibit abortion completely or offer it in restricted forms in one way or another. And what it did is it basically took that legalizing power away from the states and said that once again, just like with Griswold, there is a right to privacy, specifically a woman's right to choose what to do with her own reproduction in her own body, and that states had no regulating power over that. They could not infringe on that, so they tied it back to the Griswold decision in that way. It also established that states could regulate abortions if they did decide to place restrictions, and this is something that's key to know. They separated it into a trimester framework, and so they basically said this. They said in the first trimester, there's really no restrictions that a state is allowed to put on. And we have various ones that have come into play here and there, like 24-hour waiting periods and parental consent laws. And those are heavily contested by abortion advocacy groups. So that was sort of the first trimester thing. Second trimester, the states could place some restrictions on abortion only for the woman's health. Only if we're considering that this would be for the woman's health. We're not talking about the fetus's life yet. The third trimester restrictions basically said that states could prohibit abortion in third trimester, provided that the woman's health and life are not at stake. So one of the key things, and there's one of my first little things where the question mark is hanging off there. The key thing to think about here is health. Health was left deliberately vague in this decision to include mental and emotional health. So basically, what that was saying is that thanks to the right to privacy, a woman can walk into a late-term abortion facility in third trimester and say, I am depressed about this pregnancy. And if the doctor, who is already performing late-term abortions, so doesn't have a problem with them, can concur with her assessment that, yes, she's depressed, she has anxiety, she's, got heartburn, I don't know what the real problem is, but if it's something that you can tie back to her health, then legally she can have an abortion. What does that mean? That means that abortion is legal through all 9 months of pregnancy in this country. I have fought with people on this. They tell me, no, it's not. I said, yes, it is, technically, on the books. It is, based on the Supreme Court decision. So you can see how the Supreme Court decision very specifically ties back to that contraception precedent, which was put out there with the Griswold. Now, there's another case that more blatantly ties contraception to abortion. The Planned Parenthood versus Casey case of 1992, the first thing it is, it reaffirmed and upheld Roe. There were about 5 provisions that were in consideration, and I believe it was coming out of the state of Pennsylvania, but don't quote me on that one. And the first thing they did, though, was they modified the existing trimester framework to use viability as the marker to determine when states could start imposing prohibitions to protect the life of the fetus. Why did they have to start using viability instead of the trimesters? Well, in 1973, medical technology wasn't really at the place where we could support the life of a premature baby in that second trimester range. And so it was, the 3rd trimester start was a good time, it was a good place to cut it off and say, after 3rd trimester, the states can start looking at the life of the fetus as a potential state interest, and so they can start putting restrictions on the law to protect that child, even at the expense of the mother, as long as it wasn't risking her health or her life. Now, 2 decades later, medical technology is now supporting the life of premature babies well back into their 2nd trimester. In fact, I just read an article the other day that I think the youngest premature baby ever to survive was 21 weeks gestation, 5 days, which was 2 weeks before the abortion cutoff in that particular area. So we have babies being born and children being aborted at the same age, and those babies that are being born are actually surviving. So they had to change the terminology to be viability for whatever that is. Whatever they determine is viability, that will be where we can start making some laws. Well, the problem, of course, is that the courts are saying that viability dictates human value, right? And, of course, God, and our church understands this, disagrees with that. Human value is not based on what medical technology can do to save the life of that person. So the 1992 case not only upheld Roe, but it also used the reasoning that basically supports the church's position that contraception leads to abortion. Here's what it has to say. And this is the actual opinion written by the 3 justices, including our own Sandra Day O'Connor. Thank you, swing voter. For 2 decades of economic and social developments, people have organized intimate relationships and made choices that define their views of themselves and their places in society in reliance on the availability of abortion in the event that their contraception should fail. Right there in the 1992 court case, Supreme Court case, they are admitting that people need to have abortion. They need to have abortion because, hold on, it's coming. It's not that we need contraception to prevent abortion, it's that we need abortion because we already have contraception in place, right? So the first contraception begets the second. They're intimately linked. Make sense? Doesn't make sense, but that's, those are the facts right there. This is not news. It's specifically not news to Planned Parenthood, okay? Planned Parenthood, the largest contraception and abortion provider in the world, their own statistical arm, Guttmacher Institute, reports that 54% of women, 54%, more than half, who have abortions have been on some kind of contraception in the month that they got pregnant. So here's the million-dollar question. If contraception is so readily available, which it is, if we have more of it, if we have looser laws, which we do, and if women can get it for virtually no cost, which they can, then how is it that we have more than half of the abortions occurring every single day in this country are being obtained by women who are practicing the preventative method meant to avoid this unwanted pregnancy that usually motivates the choice to abort? Choice is not spelled like that. But you get the picture, right? Let's dig deeper, shall we? All right. We'll start with biology, because who does not want to be in a science class on a Thursday night, right? I mean, I know I would love to. Okay, so all you biology geeks out there, advanced biology question. What is the purpose of sex?
Procreation.
Thank you. Reproduction, procreation, absolutely. In fact, everything that occurs in the woman's body, hormonally, physiologically, everything, every single month, everything is geared toward ovulation. It's geared toward having the best chance to conceive, and it's geared toward sustaining pregnancy. That's what her body does. That's how she's made. That's the goal. Everything in a fertile woman's body, that is the goal every single month. In fact, come on. A woman's libido will actually rise around the time she's about to ovulate. It's kind of nature's way of making sure she's in the mood to make a baby. and women know this. We know this. So, I mean, obviously, it's like we don't want this to be a drab experience because pregnancy and childbirth isn't going to be a walk in the park. So God had a great idea here. Okay, we're going to at least, get the woman interested at the time that she's about to ovulate. So engaging in sexual activity necessarily leads to potential pregnancy. The two go hand in hand. It's natural law. It's just how we're made, right? Nothing supports the notion that the sexual act ought to be stripped of its fertile nature. Nothing does. In fact, Sigmund Freud, atheist, had this to say about contraception. He said, we actually describe sexual activity as perverse if it has given up the aim of reproduction and pursues the attainment of pleasure as an aim independent of it. So, biologically, that's why infertility is considered a malfunction, right? Because if a sexual act isn't having the potential to generate new life, to generate a new child, then we consider that something has gone wrong in a childbearing woman. Something is not working properly. And just the same, that's also why homosexuality is considered a sexual perversion. There's no possibility for the sexual act to generate new life. The body parts involved aren't even being used in accord with their design and intention. Now, I'm just talking biology here right now. I haven't brought in any kind of religious rhetoric. I haven't talked about civil laws. I'm simply just talking about the biology of how we are made. We are biologically constructed, just biologically constructed to generate new life through the complementary union of the male and female genders. This is how we are made. Give you an example. Take the male body, okay? And you can imagine whoever you want, I guess, in your head. Take the male body and just suspend it in space, all right? Without reference to the female body. Take it out of context of the relationship with the female body. Now just take a look at this thing. It makes no sense, right? What is that? What is that for? You can't really get an understanding of what it's about. And the same with the female body. The same can be said for the female body. Take it out of reference to the male body, and it has no purpose. The design does not make sense. Put them together, they make perfect sense, automatically. Right? We don't have to really know much about it. We can see they go together, and it's their reproductive parts that communicate that message, that they are meant to come together as one. So that complementarity is built into our biology. It's part of our design. All right. So if the male and female sex and fertility are biological realities, then it goes to show that pregnancy is not a disease. It's not something that's gone wrong in the body. It's something that's gone right, right? So now, when our bodies are not working properly, we have medical technology to aid, to heal, to repair, to try to fix what's not working right. So, if I have strep throat, I take a pill, an antibiotic to help get me better. Maybe there's a heart irregularity, and so they implant a pacemaker into my heart to regulate the rhythm so that it's pumping properly the way it's intended. Or someone with diabetes knows they have to take an injection of insulin every single day, because the pancreas isn't doing what it's supposed to be doing. We understand that we're meant to be cooperating with our design, we're meant to be in good health, everything's meant to be functioning properly. And all of medicine aims to heal and repair that which isn't working properly, that which is ill, that which is hurt. Except when it comes to our reproductive system. That's the only area of medical technology where the entire aim, when we're talking about contraception, is to impair that which is working properly. What's up with that, right? Our reproductive system is called a reproductive system because it's the reproductive system. That's what it's meant to do. It's meant to reproduce. Fertility is a good. It is something that has gone right and is doing what it's supposed to be doing. Its aim is to conceive and transmit new life. Contraception twists the purpose of biology, and it twists the purpose of medicine. Both of those purposes get twisted when we bring contraception into the equation. Now, it's our Holy Mother Church, of course, instituted by Christ, that elaborates on the natural biological law, identifies the very profound second purpose in humanity to be of sex. What is the second purpose of sex? Unity of the spouses. Okay, quick theology lesson here. I'm going to try to make it quick if I can. It's something we could spend days and days on, but what is marriage? Well, marriage is a covenant. It is not a contract. Okay? Contract is an exchange of goods and services. So recently we had a plumbing leak. We called a plumber, we handed him over a lot of money, and then he fixed that leak, and he went on his way, and we were happy. And so that was an exchange of goods and services, and we signed a contract for all of that to happen the way we intended. That is not marriage. Marriage is an exchange of persons. The church has always upheld marriage as a very sacred one-flesh union that is only honest and fully self-donating within marriage. An exchange of persons. That's marriage, that's sex, right? That is an exchange of persons. And you need to be able to fully donate of yourself in order to exchange yourself, to give yourself to your spouse. It's in fact a renewal of the wedding vows. Well, how so? The words that are said at the altar on the wedding day, well, they are consummated and become flesh on the wedding night. And the couple comes together in the marital embrace. And they continue to renew those wedding vows every single time they come together in the marital embrace. It's a reflection of the Mass, which makes present the Word made flesh, right? In fact, it is the very sacrifice of Christ on Calvary. To understand it this way, we can see that when a couple comes together and makes love, they are saying, in essence, this is my body, give it up for you. Okay? That is what the church understands marriage to be. It's meant to express the unique bonds that God has formed for the purpose of imaging Trinitarian love. What do I mean by that? Okay, well, we have the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. The Father pours himself out in perfect self-donating love to the Son. The Son, in turn, pours himself out in perfect self-donating love to the Father. And it's this eternal exchange of divine love that is so perfect and profound that it actually becomes the third person of the Trinity, which is the Holy Spirit. How are married couples supposed to image that? Well, husband pours himself out on the wife, and wife in turn pours herself out, and in this eternal exchange of free, total, faithful, fruitful love, in the marital embrace, 9 months later, you may have to give that love a name. Start changing its diapers. Staying up all night nursing it. And, so that is how we image the Trinitarian love. So, sex ultimately is meant for babies and bonding. That's a good way to remember it. It's meant for babies and bonding. It's meant for procreation and unity. So understanding sex in this way, you realize you can't fully be united to your spouse in the spousal embrace if you are withholding the very essence of what makes you both male and female. It's impossible to fully self-donate. And that is what contraception does. Contraception is not just separating the procreative process, it's actually separating the unitive intention there. I mean, we even have contraception that's called barrier methods. Barrier in between husband and wife. Okay? This is not the way God intended it. So what does this mean? Well, since the advent of the pill and its availability in 1960, it's become increasingly ingrained in our culture to think it's normal for a couple to want to engage in the act without having a child result. It's become a normal default setting for how we view it, to want to enter the act without getting pregnant, without having a baby. In other words, our culture has developed and adopted what our church calls a contraceptive mentality. A contraceptive mentality. We have separated the very obvious biological function and intention of sex, which is procreation, right? And the deeper spiritual connection between husband and wife, this unity, by saying, I want the act, but I don't want the baby. And that is exactly what the abortion industry says, right? Isn't it Planned Parenthood's tagline to say every child a wanted child, right? The contraceptive mentality bases the value of a child on whether or not a parent wants the child. That's what the contraceptive mentality does. Our problem is not unwanted children, it's unwanting parents. It's an unwanting society that we have become. A society that identifies the potential of children as a burden, as a threat, as a commodity, even a right, I dare say, right? And when we begin to declare in our actions that conception or contraception is a right, then we inevitably become a society that entertains the idea that pregnancy or abortion is also a right. See the connection there? Remember, this is all about reproductive rights. This whole question is about reproductive rights. That's the tagline that's thrown out constantly in our culture. It's about not being pregnant when you don't want to be or aren't ready for a baby. But we have a God-given, completely natural means, and it's 100% foolproof for doing this. You want to guess what it is?
Yes.
Abstinence! It's called abstinence. Abstinence simply says, if you aren't ready for this, if you aren't ready for a baby, then you should not be having sex. It's just a very simple equation here, okay? We practice abstinence for other reasons in life, right? One of the parties may be sick in the couple, you know, we would practice abstinence in that case. Maybe the woman has just given birth, and I would hope the man would that they would need to practice abstinence. Maybe they're staying in a camping trailer for several days with family members and would prefer not to be engaging at that time. So it's a simple free will decision. We practice abstinence for many reasons. Okay, so a woman is only fertile for about 1 week out of the month. Anyway, so for a married couple, well, you just identify that fertile time, and then if you are truly not ready for serious reasons, simply abstain. Simply practice abstinence. And for people who are not married, well, if you're not ready for a baby because you don't want to have a baby out of wedlock, and most people don't, then you practice what the church calls chastity. You practice abstinence in your relationship, and it'd be very fulfilling. That's what we're called to. It's not hard. It's a simple free will decision. And there's other benefits to abstinence as well. Not only is it 100% effective in postpartum pregnancy, there's no side effects. It's morally responsible. It facilitates self-knowledge, specifically for the woman, and self-mastery. It requires both partners to be willing participants. It's not just on in one woman. Take your pill and you just take care of that reproductive issue. Be available when I need you. Fosters communication. Okay, so these are some of the there's many, many others, but these are some of the benefits of abstinence. Problem is, society does not want to accept that if you don't want to have a baby, you simply don't engage in the act that brings about babies. Instead, as writer and speaker Jennifer Roback Morse puts it, unlimited sexual activity without a live baby resulting is the quintessential modern entitlement. Love that. Love the way she says that. That's why I'm plagiarizing her, although I give her credit. I had to use her quote. We think we ought to be able to engage in the act anytime without any fertile consequences. Really, that's what we've become. So the contraceptive mentality attempts to separate marriage from sex and sex from babies. And as a result, we have more people engaging in risky behaviors that lead to so-called unwanted pregnancies. Even Gandhi here, not a Catholic, Hindu, he had this to say about contraception, which is very profound, and this is one of them where it's hanging off here, so I will read it to you fully if I can. Contraceptive methods are like putting a premium on vice. They make men and women reckless. If contraceptive methods become the order of the day, nothing but moral degradation can be the result. As it is, man has sufficiently degraded woman for his lust, and contraception, no matter how well-meaning the advocates may be, will still further degrade her. Since contraception became widely available, do we have more out-of-wedlock births or fewer? Do we have more single mothers or fewer? Do we have more abortions or fewer? Planned Parenthood just released their annual report. In 2011, they performed a record number of abortions. Over 333,000 were performed in that year. It was like 4,500 more than the year previous. Averages out to about 1 every 94 seconds. Abortions happening in this country where contraception is widely available. The answer is always more. We keep pumping contraception into our society. In turn, that facilitates this contraceptive mentality, and that mentality is the backbone of the abortion rights movement. Yes to sex, no to baby. So what's the bottom line problem here? Well, contraception treats pregnancy as a disease, and abortion has become the cure when the preventative measure fails. Period. It does fail. It does fail. How many of you have known somebody who's gotten pregnant with birth control? Oops! Had an accident. Something went wrong, right? The idea that, oh, I'm surprised. You're surprised? You engaged in the sexual act and you got pregnant? No, something didn't go wrong. Something went right. Right? But birth control fails. In fact, here's just a little side note. In all contraception inflates its effectiveness. When we see 99% effective. 98% effective. Oh, it sounds pretty good. It's only 1% chance that I might have this failure of a pregnancy if I have sex. But remember what I said earlier, that 3 weeks out of the month, roughly, a woman can't get pregnant. It's impossible for her to get pregnant biologically, the way God has designed her body. So whether it's a condom or a pill or an IUD or a shot, the promoted efficacy is greatly exaggerated because it takes credit for preventing pregnancy during a time in a woman's cycle when she is just naturally infertile. So it's not really 99%. They can't really tell you what it really is, but people don't know that part because they don't know enough about their bodies. Women don't know enough about their bodies and what's going on with their cycle. All right. Still not convinced? I'm assuming you're convinced, at least to some extent. There's more, and here's where it gets really sinister. Here's where a lot of people don't know the facts when they're practicing contraception, especially when it comes to some of our very devout, pro-life Christian brothers and sisters. They don't know what, in fact, is how sinister it gets. But in the final analysis, contraception and abortion, for lack of a better term, or maybe because it is the appropriate term, are in bed together. They are in bed with one another. The contraceptives that many pro-life women take actually have an abortifacient mechanism in place. And you can actually go straight to the pharmaceutical company themselves, and they will tell you straight up. Under clinical pharmacology, this is from one of the birth control pills. I don't know, I got it for the pharmacist, but so here's how it works. Again, many women are taking this because doctor says take this pill, and they have no idea what it's doing, and they think they're being empowered. I'm now empowered. I have no idea what this pharmaceutical is doing to my body. It's not empowerment. First thing that it's doing, it suppresses ovulation, tricking the body into thinking that it's pregnant, and when we are pregnant, we don't ovulate. I haven't ovulated since I conceived this child. So it suppresses ovulation, but boy, oh boy, does nature want to break through. And so sometimes we have breakthrough ovulation. So there's a second mechanism in place to thicken the cervical mucus. Why? Because, again, as I mentioned, how the woman's body is always aiming to try to conceive. Well, as she approaches ovulation, she produces a mucus that is very favorable for sperm, for its motility, mobility, viability, keeps it alive, transports it to the egg. It's very helpful to the sperm. Well, the birth control, hormonal contraceptives is specifically what I'm talking about, and that is IUDs, shots, rings, a pill, which is the most common. What they do hormonally is they thicken that mucus, make it kind of dry and sticky, so it's very hostile to the sperm. But boy, are those little suckers persistent. They've made it this far, and they are not going to give up. So there are times when you will actually have a sperm that fertilizes an egg. We call that conception. That is a new human life has now come into existence. And hormonal contraceptives, the third mechanism, is to then thin out the lining of the endometrium, thin out that uterus where it's normally very lush and rich because the woman's body is anticipating a possible pregnancy. So it's very nutrient, oxygen rich. It thins it out. So you have this new life that travels through the fallopian tube and arrives at the womb where it's it's intended to be for the next 9 months, and goes to implant, and there's nothing to implant into. It's like a barren wasteland. So it's flushed out of the woman's body as what she might think is a late period, and it's really a very early abortion. Okay? The birth control pill tells you this. The pharmaceutical companies tell you this. This is the exact writing that I took from the clinical pharmacology. Although the primary mechanism of this action is inhibition of ovulation, other alterations include changes in the cervical mucus, which increases the difficulty of sperm entry into the uterus, and the endometrium, which reduces the likelihood of implantation. This is why the abortion industry has been so hell-bent on trying to redefine the scientific definition of when one becomes pregnant. Because they understand that if they can change it from conception to implantation, then they know it accommodates the sales pitch that they're using, the contraception that they're doling out, that it prevents pregnancy. And they can say that without technically lying, even though it's working as a potential abortifacient. Okay? It's ludicrous. It's completely anti-science. We've already defined when life begins. We've already defined when a woman gets pregnant. You get pregnant when that sperm and that egg is no longer that sperm and that egg, and they have met and become this completely new, unique human life. Unique, unrepeatable, with its own DNA, and it meets all the criteria for life. It's dividing, differentiating, and multiplying, and metabolizing. And all it needs is proper nourishment, all it needs is time, all it needs is the right environment, which by design is the mother's womb for 9 months in order to thrive. That's all it needs. So that is some of the sinister stuff that's happening behind the scenes, and certainly how we can see contraception and abortion very intimately linked there. This constant need for nature to break through, too, is what ultimately leads to these failures in birth control when a woman does get pregnant. And so what does that do to someone's mentality? She's done what she thinks she's supposed to do. She's taken the responsible action, and she has taken birth control in order not to get pregnant, and now suddenly she's faced with this unwanted pregnancy. And what am I left with? What are my options? I did what I was meant to do. And enter abortion. That becomes a justifiable act because the responsibility is no longer placed on the action of engaging in sex. It's placed on the fact that, well, my contraception failed. That's how contraception leads to abortion. Contraception has never been for women. It is not about women's empowerment. It is not about women's liberation. This is something I've become so passionate about trying to get the word out on because I once stood by that stance that it was. I once said, yes, this is empowered. This is how you take that reproductive right away from a woman. It's her body, her choice. She needs to make her decision. Contraception is not for women. It's the ultimate attack on her dignity and her beautiful design. How can contraception, if you think about it, how can contraception celebrate womanhood when its entire aim is to unplug the very essence of womanhood? Complete contradiction. Contraception leads to abortion, which is never good for women. Women have suffered for years, believe me. I know people who have had abortions. I know someone very close to me who's had one, and it leaks a poison into the woman like nothing else. To ever be faced with the question of an unplanned pregnancy, one has to first recognize that the man is very much responsible. Because in one way or another, whether she admits it or not, or he admits it or not, or whether they didn't know it or not, has been used for selfish gratification. Because she has been asked to either unplug her fertility and be on some kind of a contraception so she'd be available for sex, kind of a vending machine for sex, pop the pill in, take what he wants out, or be faced with this choice to kill her own offspring if she does encounter actually getting pregnant. It's a complete erroneous idea to suggest that that's good for women. We have been fed a lie here. This is a lie. It's a lie that's been fed to the masses, and our culture is just devouring it, just eating it up. And it's being pitched in presidential campaigns as, you know, vote like your body, women parts depend on it, and things like that. It's ridiculous. Interesting note, the women that were in the Supreme Court cases, Roe, whose real name is Norma McCurdy, and Doe versus Bolton, which is the companion case that was with the Supreme Court case Roe versus Wade and was handed down the same day, Her name was Sandra Cano. They have both come out since those cases were decided and denounced them, actively denounced them, said that they were coerced by lawyers who were greedy and wanted to use their particular cases. They both call themselves pro-life. Norma McCorvey is a Catholic convert, I believe now, and actively against Supreme Court decision, trying to get it overturned. And neither one of them ever had the abortion that was in question for those lawsuits. Neither one of them ever had the abortion. So that says something. We as women ought to be absolutely outraged. And as men, we ought to be outraged, because our job is to stand up and defend women and their dignity. This attack starts with this assumption that our bodies are broken when they're working properly. That somehow our fertility is a weakness, and that if life enters our womb, we've been led to believe that it's simply a choice to have that life ripped out of us in the name of empowerment and liberation, and somehow come out of it unscathed. It's a lie. Contraception and abortion are lies, and we're all subject to the temptation to believe them if we don't rest in the truth, in God's church, to reveal our dignity, our design, and our purpose as male and female persons. Until we can realign ourselves with God's plan for sex and marriage, until we can see the inherent dignity of human life, always, until we can respect the beautiful, reproductive, life-giving power that's entrusted to women, until we can square with the fact that babies are a gift, they're not a right, they're not a burden, until we can own the responsibility to understand conception is a natural result of engaging in the sexual act, we are going to continue to see this contraceptive mentality fuel the abortion agenda and damage many, many more lives along the way. We have to stand up and be a mouthpiece for the truth. And it's not easy, especially with these controversial issues. We've got to defend it when it's under attack, especially when it's under attack. I've been in some pretty heated debates with friends from the past, with very close family members, and I admit it's put me in reconciliation many times, because I have to confess my uncharity and my inability to be patient and to remember where I once was. But people are stuck believing these lies. And I was talking to a lady earlier who says she's dealing with that with her own kids, and it's tough to get them to see the truth. But we have to continue to persevere, to continue to pray. We have to continue to speak the truth. It will speak for itself, and hopefully some of the seeds that we plant will take root. But one of the options is definitely not to just stand down and remain silent, no matter how awkward it is, no matter how uncomfortable it is, no matter how we may be persecuted. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.